Hi, it's Friday, Good Friday, and time to look back at what happened at Queen's Park this week. This week, Premier Doug Ford imposed an emergency break in Ontario to deal with the third wave of COVID. And I'm going to be talking about that, as well as progress on government bills in the legislature, and an opportunity for an opposition day for the NDP at the beginning of the week. Keep watching if you would like to hear more, or else please join me next week. Premier Ford imposed an emergency break in Ontario this week. Actually, that's the term that they used in the government press release. And then the press is using terms like gray lockdown or shutdown. It's kind of confusing. And I think that the name change that the government chose, emergency break, shows that there's a lot of politics involved in that decision. And I'll get back to that in just a bit. We knew that the third wave of it was coming. And I remember a press conference by the Science Table, which advises the provincial government, back in February the 11th. And they used the term imminent disaster that the models were predicting because there are these virus mutations. And there was a reporter who said, do you really mean to use that term? And the co-chair of the Science Table said, yes, essentially. So we have now a situation where the intensive care unit beds are occupied at the highest level during the whole pandemic, and hospitals have been speaking out saying this is going to cause problems for anybody who needs them that is not pandemic related. The Science Roundtable members have been using terms like out of control and suggesting that a stay-at-home order is needed, which is much more severe than what Premier Ford has imposed. So maybe it's hard to make these political decisions and to prevent a third wave, but we could have made it better, I think. If you look at different jurisdictions, Mexico doesn't have a third wave. France and Germany do. California does not have a third wave, but Michigan does. And here in Ontario and Quebec, we do have a third wave. And you've got to ask the question, could we have done something different to maybe not prevent a third wave? Maybe that was too hard, but actually just to make it, to mitigate it, to make it less severe, or to delay it, because we have the vaccines on the way, and it's just a matter of weeks before the vaccines start kicking in at a high enough percentage of the population. So this question was dominating question period in the legislature. Could the provincial government have done something different? Could we have targeted vaccinations of frontline workers in places where the virus was spreading? Could we have had paid sick days so that sick workers wouldn't go into work? This could have made a difference. Or maybe there's a component of the transmission which just comes from behavior of people who are getting really tired of the virus. And that behavior is spreading the virus, and it can only be stopped with a lockdown. And the question is asked, is Doug Ford under political pressure to reopen? Because he was making reopening announcements just a couple of weeks ago. All along, these models were saying, it's going to get worse. So it's a question of whether there was perhaps economic pressure. But the economists have done some studies, and they've said, it's better to have a hard lockdown at the beginning, because this on-again, off-again process actually makes the economy weaker, because it takes months for the economy to recover in between lockdowns. So it's not good to have a short lockdown, which is not enough, and makes you have another lockdown soon thereafter. So that dominated Queen's Park as usual. In terms of legislation, Bill 255, which is about elections and election financing, has a mixed bag of proposals, some good and some not so good, was at committee. So there was expert and advocate testimony in the committee. The budget bill, Bill 269, passed second reading debate. So it's going to Finance Committee, where the details will now be discussed. Bill 257, which is called the Broadband and Internet Infrastructure Bill, had third reading debate. So I think a vote will take place as soon as the legislature comes back. This is the bill which is, well, the broadband part of it is okay, but it also contains a little a piece which allows a ministerial zoning order to override what's called the provincial policy statement. And just to explain why that is so controversial, Liberal House Leader John Fraser, who's not a member of the committee, but he can at least table motions at the committee, even if there's nobody to move it. He tabled a motion to rename the Act the Broadband and Internet Infrastructure and Enabling Government to Easily Pave Over Wetlands and Green Spaces Act. And that's what the ministerial zoning order overriding the provincial policy statement allows the government to do, essentially. On Monday, there was an opportunity for the NDP to present a motion to the legislature. That's called an opposition day. And so they proposed a motion to ask the government to apologize for not keeping the promise of building an iron ring around long-term care facilities, and also calling on the government to designate March the 30th as an annual day of mourning for the people who died in long-term care homes. So as usual, these opposition motions were defeated by the government. It lost in a vote of 26 to 42. And something that's interesting to note, you may notice that 26 to 42, if you add them together, it's way less than 124, the total number of seats in the legislature. And some MPPs did not vote, but you should not criticize anybody for that, because what happens is that the parties in the House, they agree that only a number of members will be present to vote. There's always other things to do, other people to meet for other sorts of legislative work, constituency office work. So during this pandemic time, there's an agreement where a certain number of legislators from each party shows up in the same proportions as if all the members were there in the chamber. So the opposition motion was defeated with only half of the MPPs voting, but please don't criticize anybody for not voting, because there's just an agreement there between parties. The legislature is not sitting next week. It comes back April the 12th, but the pandemic rages on, and I'm sure there will be a lot to report on next Friday. So please tell me if you have any comments. Just put some comments below this video, and I'd love to hear from you. Please join me next Friday when I look back at what happened at Queen's Park this week.